I'm David Cohen. I'm Carla Cohen's husband. I'm happy to continue to be able to do introductions here at Politics and Prose. This is a special occasion to celebrate the publication of A Short Guide to a Long Life by David Agus, Dr. Agus. And I very much wanted to do this event, not only because of the range that Politics and Prose continues to have under the leadership of Brad Graham and Lissa Muscatine and the fabulous staff here, the range of books, the range of adult education that goes on, the wonderful chance for children to enjoy books along with all other things that they enjoy these days. But books is part of it. And the fabulous programs that you can find in the newsletter if when you get it in the front. And you can also become a member of Politics and Prose and be part of this community of independent bookstores that believe in civil discourse and serious discussion, but also to have fun. And as a matter of fact, among the events tonight will be one after this event, so you don't have to put away the chairs, called Trivia Night. And you can test your trivia knowledge on literature and maybe baseball or things of that sort. But we're here now to celebrate the publication of David Agus's A Short Guide to a Long Life. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this book is that your grandfather married Carla and me. And and you're not the first Agus I've read. I've read this book, but I've had a chance to read also your grandfather's books some decades ago. So I don't want to be tested, but even so, it is wonderful to be here with your extended family, many of whom are my friends. As an organizer and as a guy in adult education, I love that you have shown that this book is about taking personal responsibility for your health, so that you have that responsibility to meet. We remember how our body is really a miracle, but the miracle comes from heaven. It really comes from meeting our own responsibilities and making that miracle real. And recognizing that you don't do it alone. So at times we're charged with finding ways of connecting ourselves so that we have other people who can help us, whether they're advocates, whether they're people we can talk to, whether we cohabitate. And so I think that blending of individual and community is just wonderful. I told you, I've read this book, and it's an accessible and wonderful book, and I can enthusiastically recommend it because for the layperson, which I am in this instance, I can understand it. And so David Agus is a great communicator. That doesn't always happen in his profession, as we know, but he has met that standard of being really a fine communicator. So we're here to learn about prevention, what to do, what not to do, how to be equipped in dealing with your doctor so you're not there as a passive lump just because that doctor is an expert. So let's welcome David Agus to Politics and Prose. I'm happy to say this is going to be, he's done a lot of events, but this is his first and only bookstore event. And so that's a tribute to all of you and Politics and Prose.
Thank you so much for being here. Obviously, it's great to be here with family and friends. The book came out on Tuesday, and we did all the media this week. So we did all the TV shows, and my mentor is a guy named Walter Isaacson, who lives here in town. And I emailed Walter and said, I got an invite to Politics and Prose. Do you know what that is in Washington? He emailed me back 2 words, do it. So I'm here. About 2.5 years ago, I handed my first book into the publisher. And I called it What is Health? Because to me that was the key question. I don't know what health is. Is it a blood test? Is it how you look? Is it how you feel? Is it how you sleep? Is it what people say about you? I didn't know what health was. So to me that was the key question. And so about a week later, the publisher called me up and said, Agus, Steve Jobs just called and changed the title of your book. I'm like, he did what? And I called up Steve. I go, Steve, what's going on? He goes, you can't use the word health in the title, David. It's a bad word in our country. It turns people off. It's like chewing cardboard. And so I go, okay, that's fine. And why would you call the publisher and not me? He goes, Agus, it's their job to market the book, not yours. I said, okay. He said, you can't give a gift to someone of a gift with a book with the word health in the title. It implies the other person's in bad health. So he came up with the title, The End of Illness, a bold declaratory statement. Well, it turns out that year it was the second most gifted book in all of Amazon.com. So Steve obviously knew the marketing side. And I was shocked and surprised that it did very well around the world. It became number one in 31 different countries. So people all over started to get the message and wanted to be empowered. What this book is, A Short Guide to a Long Life, are 65 declarative rules or statements about what health really is. And I'm a believer that each of us are in charge of our own life. Each of us will go to a doctor and not have the doctor say, well, you got to do X, Y, and Z. I want you to go in with a rule list. I want you to go in with questions. How many of you got a flu shot this year, for example? Oh, right, half of you. The other half of you just want to hit in the head. So influenza is growing. We did a story with Charlie Rose on Friday that is growing up, going up literally 45 states. It's in panic mode. Roche, the pharmaceutical company, ran out of Tamiflu for kids on Friday. Pretty astonishing that the one drug we have to treat the flu, and obviously these companies are about their quarterly earnings, they ran out of it because there's no incentive to keep a backlog, because if it's not a bad flu year, they lose money. What's interesting, though, is that if you skipped that flu shot and got the flu, a decade from now, your rate of heart disease and cancer are 13 and 17% elevated because of the inflammation associated with the flu. The way our country works, you get cancer and heart disease over 65, we pay everything for you. So what happens is that a behavior of an individual affects society. We all have a right in this country to do whatever we want. We can smoke, we can be as large as we want, we can sit all day, and society has the obligation to pay for the healthcare ramifications of our decisions. At some point, that has to change. At some point, if we want to change healthcare in this country from the runaway train that it is, which is 18.5% of GDP today and growing, we actually have to do something different. And we actually have to start to talk about preventing disease. 2,433 years ago, Hippocrates wrote about pulling the bark of the willow tree off and chewing it, and pain and fever went away. It's a remarkable observation at the time. In fact, if you look in the book, the first 2 pages are quotes from Hippocrates, because I really believe his view of medicine was as good or better than almost anybody in between today's world and theirs. But that substance in the willow tree became a pill in the 1920s. And if you take that pill every day, you reduce not the incidence, but the death rate of cancer by 37%, heart disease by 22%, and stroke by 17%. That pill costs $3.34 a year. It's called a baby aspirin. So if everybody in our country over the age of 40 took a baby aspirin, we'd have more of an effect on life extension than every drug approved by the US FDA for the last 5 years combined. Yet most people don't do it. We need to start to say it's our obligation to prevent disease. I truly believe that we can all live until our 9th or 10th decade. The way we do that is preventing disease. And I'm saying that out of weakness and not strength. I, as a cancer doctor, see advanced disease all the time. And I know I'm not good at treating it. But I know, whether it be catching disease early or preventing it, I know we're good at that. And that's where we have to focus. That's where we have to start to put our attention with these. And so what the book is a bunch of rules, do's and don'ts. And we go through all of them data-driven. You know, I was on this remarkable show called Dr. Oz a few months ago where he called me the most controversial doctor in America. And, I mean, he's a good friend. He does it to get ratings, and he'll be the first to admit that. But I said to him afterwards, you know, Mehmet, I'm the most conservative doctor in America. Everything we say is data-driven. Everything we say comes from a clinical trial in a respected journal showing an outcome that works. And so the book goes through things like cohabitate, as was mentioned earlier. People who live with somebody actually live longer. People with a positive attitude or a belief system do about 20% better in clinical trials across the board. And so if one has a negative attitude or one is depressed, we need to pay attention to that because it will affect your life expectancy. There are simple tenets in there like regularity. It matters not just what you eat, but when you eat. If you have your lunch today at noon and tomorrow at 2 o'clock, stress hormones go up. Metabolism goes down. You actually gain weight. You don't think as well. You don't move as well. An amazing clinical trial was done where they said to 600 parents, have your kids go to bed whenever they want. Here's a stopwatch. Wake them up 10 and a half hours later. They said to another 600 parents, have your kids go to bed the same time every night, wake up in 10 and a half hours. And if you look at the data, there's a 24% improvement in cognition in the kids who went to bed the same time and got up the same time. That's good to great right there. What's true in kids is much more true even in us. So regularity and schedule has a major effect in how we perform and our risk for disease. People who eat their meals whenever they want, that is graze, just grab food, grab a peanut, grab an apple when they're hungry, have 81% more diabetes. Diabetes, one of the biggest growing incidents in our country. There's another amazing observation, and that came from 1953. It's the medical journal Lancet, one of the great British medical journals. There were 26,000 workers in the British Transit Authority. Half were the bus drivers that sat 90% of the day, and half the ticket takers that walked up and down those double-decker buses. They weighed the same, lived in the same environment, smoked the same, and married people of similar socioeconomic background. Yet, 60% less heart disease and 40% less cancer in the ticket takers. We have become a society of bus drivers. The more important you are at a company, the closer your parking space is to your desk. The richer you are, the more bathrooms in your house, so you don't have to walk room to go to the bathroom. We've developed LEED certification for buildings based on the environment, yet we do nothing based on health. Who's developing a health certification for a building? The notion that somebody has a printer next to their desk makes no sense. You got to get up and walk. You know, I would go to see Steve every few weeks, and every time we would go for a walk, he said there are two reasons, Agus. One is when you go for a walk, it's good for your health. The second is when you go for a walk and you know where you're going and they don't, it gives you a business advantage. And so I was shocked when I looked at the end of the day, I wore one of these little devices, and I looked at the end of the day, movement over time. And I was shocked. I was sitting a lot more than I thought. So I got a treadmill desk at the office. So you walk at a very slow pace and can do emails. It takes about a week to get used to. The first week you kind of tilt a little either way. But I cut by 2 hours the amount of time I was sitting there. If I get home the end of the day and I'm below my wife in walking, I go walk the dog so I can go to bed number one. So our family competes. We got one for everyone in our workplace, and they each compete with each other. You know, I went before Congress talking about one of the issues in health, and they were talking about companies. And they said, what do you think about companies and what they're doing in health? I said, first of all, if I'm the CEO of a company, the first thing I do is I make every elevator coin operated. I want employees to know that when they take that elevator, they're taking something out of the bottom line of our company. One heart attack costs a company, let alone what costs an individual or a family, costs a company $78,000. One case of colon cancer costs the company $129,000. Most of the larger companies are self-insured. So damn straight you got to make that elevator coin operated. You have to, in the cafeteria, subsidize the salad with the burger. You're welcome to get a burger, but you're going to pay twice as much, and you're going to pay half as much for a salad because one will subsidize the other. So we have to say each of us needs to start to take responsibility for our health care. You know, when you ask a group of people over the age of 80 what they would do differently in their life regarding health care, two answers come up at the top uniformly. And I got it wrong when you asked me the question. I wouldn't have predicted it. So two answers come up. They would take better care of their feet and their teeth. Something as simple as that. And so if you think about it, taking care of your feet makes a lot of sense, right? As you get older, if it starts to ache and you're not doing well, you're not going to walk as much. You don't walk as much, disease is going to come on. You know, our bodies were designed to move. Our lymphatics that control our immune system have no muscle in their wall. It's the rhythmic contraction of the muscles in your legs when you walk that actually make your body work. We were designed to move. And so we need to change that culture. If a child exercises for 15 minutes, he or she will retain 18% more knowledge for 5 hours. Yet we as a society put all the physical education at the end of school rather than at the beginning. I want parents to get one of these for their kids and say, listen, you need to hit 1,000 units before you go to school so you can perform your best. You can have a chance to be the best you can be. And yet we're not doing that. We're actually encouraging kids, sit at your desk and just work on the computer. And by the way, that culture now of working at a computer, it works, right? We're very productive in today's world. The problem is if you start to look at the data, no matter how productive you are during the day, if you don't take an hour downtime, that is, shut off the screen, shut off the devices, what you happen to you during the day and what you experience doesn't sink in. Our brains were kind of made to process, and we need that downtime to sink in. So whether that downtime is taking a walk, taking a shower, singing in the shower, whatever it is, we all need to build that downtime to our lives and our children's lives so we can actually remember what happened, so we can actually grow from each day in what we do. So all of us obviously want to achieve our optimal health. So there are very simple things one can do to do it. Number one is eat real food. Sounds a little bit simple, but it's real. When you go to the grocery store, I don't want you going to any of the aisles in the middle. Just go to the perimeter where all the fresh food are, where the frozen foods are. Most of the things in the middle are processed. You want to know your grocer. You want to go in and say, what came in fresh today? Somebody designed fruits and vegetables that as soon as they're picked, they start degrading right away to put the nutrients back in the soil. So you want to get what came in that day or the day before, not what was shipped in from a southern hemisphere and on a boat for a week, etc. It will have little nutritional value. If what you want isn't there, get flash frozen. Flash frozen in general is much better than things that are days old. I want you to ask the provenance of your food. Is this fish wild or is it not? The data are very clear. 3 or more servings of cold fish a week actually have a long-term health benefit. The data are also clear that in today's world, the mercury level of fish are going up. Mercury is an impurity in coal. China is building a new coal plant every 4 days. So when they burn coal in China, the smoke goes up, and that's elemental mercury. That doesn't harm you or I. It rains, goes into the water, fresh and ocean. Bacteria convert it to methyl mercury, and then fish eat the methyl mercury. The first 100 feet of the water, sunlight degrades methyl mercury. So it's fish that live below 100 feet and are larger and larger, you get the mercury. You can have 1 serving of swordfish for 108 servings of trout on a mercury basis. 8% of women in our country who give birth to a child have a mercury level in their blood that will affect the cognitive development of the child. 8% of women. Most of those women are affluent women because that's who can afford to eat fish. And so we as a country, we allow people to get swordfish. We don't put any warnings on mercury. We don't actually talk about it. Yet mercury level in fish is going up 13% a year, every year, and it will continue to do so. Yet the FDA, and this is a piece I have in the New York Times next week, the FDA announced 2 weeks ago they're going to put limits on acrylamide in food. So acrylamide is a compound that has always been in food but was just discovered in food in 2002. When you put food to over 250 degrees, when you brown toast, for example, a sugar group and amino acid form together to get acrylamide. And the FDA put out warnings on acrylamide. Well, workers in acrylamide plants don't have more cancer than counterparts who don't work in an acrylamide plant. There's no correlation known between how much acrylamide you eat and cancer ever shown. Yet if you give a mouse 10,000-fold the dose of acrylamide that's ever been seen in a human, it will develop a testicular cancer. Yet the FDA issued a warning on this regard. The National Cancer Institute 8 years ago funded a trial to $247 million to randomize men to take vitamin E or placebo to prevent prostate cancer. The trial had to be halted after 3 years because there was a 17% increase in prostate cancer in the men who took the vitamin E. Yet there is no warning on vitamin E. There is no FDA regulation on the vitamin E. So the piece we wrote in the Times said, that doesn't make sense. Who is the leadership that is saying where we put our attention? Because it needs to be data-driven in this regard. So that goes to the next rule, which is don't take vitamins and supplements. And so many of you have heard me say this before, but we in our country spend more on vitamins and supplements than all of medical research. By the way, we spend more on potato chips than on cancer research in our country. So there in history have been 65 studies with greater than 1,000 people randomized to vitamins and supplements and placebo. None have ever shown a benefit in a normal individual in the history of mankind. Yet most people in this country are taking them. There's a notion, vitamin is life, therefore vitamins are good for you. And why do we do it? Women, in a very large study, 25,000, looked at women who took vitamins, multivitamins versus not. Slightly higher death rate in the women who took the multivitamins. In smokers and former smokers given vitamin A and beta-carotene, about a 20% increase in lung cancer in the people who took the supplements, and about a 17% increase in death. And death is a bad side effect. If you take women over the age of 70 and give them high-dose vitamin D, you increase the rate of bone fracture, not decrease, increase the rate of bone fracture in those women. There has never been a study showing that calcium and vitamin D prevents bone fracture. Yet how many here take calcium and vitamin D? And so the big question is why? In the Women's Health Initiative, 26,000 people randomized to calcium and vitamin D and placebo, no effect on bone fracture at all. Lots more side effects. If you look at the data, 97% of African Americans and 81% of Caucasians are, quote, low in vitamin D. So who defined what normal was? I didn't come with an instruction manual. I don't know about you. In the state of Canada, or the country of Canada, they had to outlaw vitamin D testing because it was 11% of their entire laboratory testing budget for the country. What happens is that you're measuring one node of a network. There's vitamin D, and there's a receptor, a sensor, and then a bunch of signaling molecules. When you measure one node of a network, it's somewhat meaningless. You and I developed a mechanism. There's a clue in nature, right? We developed a very clever mechanism to block too much vitamin D at once. It's called tanning. The only reason we tan is to block vitamin D absorption, because too much at once is bad for you. Yet we do it all the time in this pill. So what am I missing here? The definitive study came out 2 weeks ago where they looked at, it was a close to 300,000 people with calcium and vitamin D or vitamin D alone. None have ever shown a benefit and significant side effects in the group. The reason it happened is interesting. There's an association between low vitamin D and heart disease and cancer. So everyone said, well, listen, if there's an association, it must be causality. But that's not the case. Association does not equal causality. In fact, what we've since learned is that what low vitamin D is in those settings, it's a marker for inflammation. So people who have inflammation, which is people with cancer and heart disease, have a lower vitamin D. That doesn't mean you take the vitamin D. Turned out not to work. So what that means is that we have to focus on inflammation. Inflammation is the root of heart disease, cancer, and much of neurocognitive decline. We know that baby aspirin a day works by blocking inflammation. We also know that people who have inflammation, whether it be smokers who have inflammation in the lung from smoking, whether it be people who have repeated trauma in an area, whether it be people who have an inflammatory disease in their GI tract, they have much higher rates of cancer in those areas. What we also know is that other drugs to treat inflammation have a marked effect on disease, right? There's a class of drugs called statins, the Lipitor, the Crestors of the world, and these were developed because in China, there's northern China people lived a little bit longer than southern China, and there's a particular red rice yeast that grows in northern China that contaminates their yeast, and that's where Lipitor came from. And so it lowers cholesterol, but its true mechanism is blocking inflammation. The biggest drug class in history, and we got the mechanism wrong. Pretty wild, but it works. If you have a normal cholesterol, 175 and below, and take one of these pills, you decrease the incidence of heart disease, you delay it by 12 years, decrease the onset of Alzheimer's, and decrease the incidence of cancer. So the key is that blocking inflammation. One of the rules that my wife gets mad at me about is we say, listen, if you wear shoes at the end of the day hurt your feet, those stilettos, that's not a good thing. That's inflammation. So I'm not against high heels, but shoes that cause pain, like anything else. Football players, one of the earliest death rates of any profession because they keep hitting themselves. That's another issue that we have to talk about in society. If a child heads a soccer ball once, you see changes of inflammation on MRI. Yet we allow that to happen. In the NFL, there are 5 approved helmets, and they rate from A to C in terms of safety. Most of the players use the C one because they're cool looking. So we as a country have to take a step back. I'm not against football or soccer, but we have to design those sports so we don't hurt kids. There's a problem there. You know, there's an animal that takes its head and hurls it against a tree at about 70 miles an hour, 40 times a minute. And yet it has no inflammation in its brain. It's called a woodpecker. Why aren't we studying the woodpecker and learning why it doesn't get inflammation and then applying that to whether it be kids or football players, etc.? And so I'm going to kind of stop here and happy to answer more questions. I'm privileged to be here. I'm privileged to talk about the concept of health. I believe we need to create the discourse. It's a sad thing in our country where for the last 15 years in the city of Washington, all we talk about is healthcare finance. We need to talk about health. The recent Obamacare bill is a remarkable step forward in that we believe in care for all. It's got its issues, believe me, but the access to care is important, but at some point we have to change that discourse. When the greatest leader in our country in health over the last decade is the mayor of New York City, there's a problem there. We need true leadership to show the way forward. And I thank you.
Thank you, David. You're a great written communicator and a great oral communicator. And I'm glad someone has said something nice about Mayor Bloomberg, because I helped make life miserable for the tobacco industry, and he's part of the support of that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to begin the question period. There is a microphone here, and because these events are recorded so people can hear them who aren't here, they're also filmed. Please use the microphone. It's a public meeting. If you're comfortable, tell your name. David will answer questions, and then afterwards he will sign books. Step up.
Here too, if there's a... Yes.
Hi, I'm Allison. I'm a genetic counselor by training, cancer genetic counselor. And I constantly am asked, since I'm supposed to be an expert on what everyone should be getting genetic testing for. So I was just wondering what your answer on that was. And then I was also hoping you could talk a little bit about sleep.
I'm for it. I think it's a good thing.
No, I am too. I am too.
I will.
But I have had to start taking something for it. I'm not completely comfortable. It does help. But I just wanted your take on those two topics. Thanks.
So in February of this year, I got a call from the New York Times saying, David, Angelina Jolie just announced that she had a faulty gene for breast cancer. Will you write a piece? So what I wrote about was in the 1990s, our government put $25 million to identify the gene, the faulty gene for breast cancer. And it was remarkable science. It was done in the Mormons. The Mormons all wanted to be buried in the church, and they couldn't fit in the church. And they actually put a piece, hair, in the church going back over 100 years. And so they were able to look at the health histories of these people along with the DNA from the hair, and they identified the gene for breast cancer. And it was licensed to a company. The company went bankrupt, and they gave it to another company. This company charged $5,600 for the test. Well, I could run this test in my lab today for $20 or $30. They charged $5,600 because they had a patent on the gene. It was a monopoly. I called it predatory practice in the piece. And so women, if they had health insurance, so the company responded, well, most people have health insurance will pay for the test. Well, first of all, who pays the health insurance? Second is, many women who didn't have health insurance, they were at hostage. They couldn't afford the $5,600, and they weren't allowed to look at their own genes. I actually got a call from a Supreme Court justice about 6-8 weeks later saying, David, today we're going to announce that you can no longer patent a gene in our country. And we put the Pisha Rose above our desk. We democratized DNA, which is a beautiful expression if you think about it. We democratized DNA. Everybody now had the right to look at their own genes. Everybody had the ability of know what was inside them. And so that was one example. I founded a company 8 years ago where you spit into a tube, we sequence your DNA, and we tell you your likelihood of about 40 conditions. So I know my likelihood of Alzheimer's, heart disease, etc. Those aren't deterministic. Those aren't just going to happen. Like that breast cancer gene is much more deterministic. These are relative risk. Relative risk is key. If I tell you your cholesterol is elevated, that doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack. If I tell you your cholesterol is low, that doesn't mean you're safe either. It just tells you relative risk. So I'm a believer you want to know what you're up against. When you go to the doctor and they put you on an antibiotic, it's one size fits all, right? The beauty now with genetics is we can know your metabolism genes and give you the right dose for your metabolism. So I am a believer in getting this information out there. Many of you saw in the last 2 months that the FDA has blocked a company called 23andMe from doing this. I think going forward, that probably was a good thing because we need quality in the space. We need regulation in the space. It's a lot harder than it looks like to take this information and actually translate it to an individual. But this field will flourish, I guarantee you, over the next 1 to 2 years. The second question was about sleep, which again I'm for. The data on sleep are very simple. You want to do it as regular as possible. It's not as much how much you sleep, but it's when you sleep. So the same time and going to bed at the same time getting up. If you sleep for 10 hours a night, you may be 25% REM sleep. If you sleep for 5 hours a night, you may be 50% REM sleep. Your body regulates it beautifully. It's the regularity that's key. And what that means is on the weekends, go to bed up the same time, go to bed the same time as on the weekdays. If you're getting up at 6 a.m. Monday through Friday, then you try to sleep till 10 o'clock on Saturday, on Monday, your body's going to think it's 10 o'clock again, and it's going to be in panic mode and tired. So finally it catches up on Thursday, and you repeat that again on Saturday. The other is the computers that we all use, checking the emails. The light in there has a particular wavelength of yellow light that activates the brain. It's like caffeine. So when you check your iPad or read it or watch the TV screen before you go to bed with that wavelength, you're activating your brain. So it's really hard to turn it off. So you either have to block that wavelength. There are apps that do it now, or there are glasses you can buy that actually block that wavelength of life, so not to activate your brain. Or, I know it's shocking, but don't watch TV or use a device before you go to bed. There's this new thing that's pretty amazing called books. And they work. And so, the medicines on sleep today are all, you have two centers in your brain. You've got the wake center and you've got your sleep center. The medicines today for sleep, the Ambiens, the Sonatas, the Lunestas of the world, they all stimulate your sleep center. The problem is when most of us go to bed, we already are tired. So stimulating your sleep center more, that's why we get a hangover effect the next day. We don't think as well the next day. The first drugs to actually hit the awake center will come out later this year. And that will be a big advance. That being said, it is much better to take no pills to try to go to sleep. Try to get on that regular schedule. Even if you're in bed and the lights off and you're not falling asleep, that's good for your body. And I guarantee you, if you keep doing that, turning the lights off the same time every night, a couple days in a row, you may hate me the first couple days, but then you'll get that body in that circadian rhythm. and it'll be much, much better. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name's Lisa, and I have a couple questions. First one, what about the vegan diet in reducing inflammation? I've listened to Dr. Neil Barnard of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine talk about that and prevention of Alzheimer's. And the second question is, for somebody like me who doesn't like fish, and I just never have and probably never will, what about taking a high-quality fish oil, like 3 grams or 6 grams every day? Thank you.
So let's start with the fish oil. So they're now, how many of you take fish oil capsules? Oh my gosh, so a third of you to half of you take the fish oil capsules. So if I took a 4-ounce serving of salmon, how many fish oil capsules does that equal? 12. If you have a beautiful fish, you just caught this beautiful fish, you sell it to the fish market, you're going to sell it for $20 a pound. You get this ugly looking degraded fish, you give it to the fish oil company. To date, there have been 3 associative studies showing that people who eat cold water fish 3 or more times or more live longer, have fewer disease. The data are real. So everyone wants to make a buck in selling the fish oil. There have now been 7 randomized studies of fish oil capsules versus placebo. 6 were in women, 1 was in both men and women. None have ever shown a benefit. In 2 of the studies, slight increase in cancer in the women who took the fish oil capsules. And so the problem is that when we make these associations, and it takes a long time to do it, expensive studies, we all want a quick fix, right? Our nation's about quick fix. I don't want to eat an orange and an apple. I want to get a juice. It's a lot easier to do a juice. By the way, you put a fruit into a blender, there's 0 nutritional value. It degrades right away. Stay away from the juices. Stay away from the shakes, the blenders. Just eat the real food. So I'm not a big fan of fish oil capsules. If you don't like fish on principle, the idea is that you only make meat with legs, or I don't know what the... Well, I mean, get a cookbook or find a new way to do it, I guess. But, there's, or you won't get that benefit. We'll try something else. Try to do everything else right and maybe skip that. But taking the pill doesn't go over that effect. The second was the vegan diet. And so I love that. Physicians for responsible. I'm for irresponsible medicine. Not quite sure what that means. So there's been a lot made of things called the China study. So what the China study showed is that as people moved from the rural areas of China, from the farms to the cities, they started to adopt a more Western-like diet, and disease went up. What's interesting, though, is that it's not from the diet itself. It's from the fact that they became sedentary. It's from the fact that they have much more stressful lives. It's from the fact that they actually gained a lot of weight because they were sitting around all the time. And so if you look at the data, in general, there is no associative study that people on a vegan diet live longer. It's a great thing, a vegan diet. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against it at all. But it's not the only way to achieve optimal health through nutrition. And it's not better than others. In fact, in the only randomized study of nutrition, it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, there was one diet above all else for health. It was the only one in a randomized study showed to be better. It's called the Mediterranean diet. And so what that means is eat your meals on a regular time. Do not have a low-fat diet. That was one of the worst. It's a good fat diet. Olive oil, canola oil, heart-healthy eggs, cold water fish, grass-fed beef, all great. In fact, in the French study, up to 3 servings of beef a week, 3 had no health detriment at all. When you have the processed meats, the hot dogs and all, that's bad. That's a big bolus of salt. We don't want that. But eating, my grandmother said, eat in moderation, and she was right. Is that the key is just things in moderation, some of everything. Nature segregates nutrients by color, so you want a multicolored diet. Yes.
I'm getting to the point where my family is concerned about potential Alzheimer's because my father had it. And so they've even got me going to a doctor to think about it or to try to be of some help. What would you suggest for somebody in their 70s or so, or 60s, or any age that is concerned about potential Alzheimer's, especially if you've had it in the family?
Great question. So before I get to that, I want to tell you a story. So there was a researcher at UCSF who noted that when kids played video games, they started to change a little bit of how they do in their aptitude tests. So he started to study connections in the brain. And he created a game called NeuroRacer. And what it did was made people over 70 who had started to have cognitive decline, they weren't remembering things well, and he made them do 2 tasks at once with the idea that if you do 2 things at once, maybe I can connect brain area A to brain area B. It was actually driving and then noticing things and hitting something on the side saying, hey, it's here, it's here, it's here. And it was published in a medical journal called Science, one of the great medical journals. What he showed is that if you did that for 25 hours, that game, you then increase your cognitive capacity by about 28% and retained it for the 2 years they looked at in the study. A video game made you remember more, even when you stopped it. And so this clever researcher said, listen, I'm not just going to sell it at stores because there are a million games out there, most of which don't work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to the FDA, and I'm going to make it so the doctors have to write a prescription for it. So he's filing the video game with the FDA as a treatment for cognitive decline. Pretty powerful. But the question was, what if I'm, not remembering things as well? How do I really address that? And there are a couple areas to it. The first is you got to optimize every other aspect of your life. So, for example, when you eat your meals at a different time every day or graze, that's what raises insulin cortisol. And your body says, hey, I don't know when my next meal is, so it starts to conserve energy and you don't think as well. When you have what we call high glycemic index foods, big bolus of sugar, that raises insulin so high again, that's not good for the brain cognitive function. When you sit all day, the same thing. When you move, and it's movement over time. Remember, if you go to that hour at the gym, it's awesome. But if you then sit for 5 hours, it's equivalent on a health basis of smoking a pack of cigarettes. Sitting for 5 hours is the same as smoking a pack of cigarettes. So you need to move during the day. You need to optimize all of the anti-inflammatory properties of what we have, whether that be an aspirin, whether that be a statin, whether it be a lifestyle, whether it be food. All of those together can portend for the slowest decline. And now for the kicker. This is the most amazing study I've seen in this space. And it was a study done in about 290,000 people. It was the best done study in this field. And what it showed is that every year you delay retirement, you reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's by 3%. And so retirement doesn't mean working at your job retirement. You can supplement it by doing another activity, by creating a hobby that really keeps you going. So the old adage, you don't use it, you lose it, is real. Somebody who works until their 80s versus 65, that's a dramatic reduction right there. And this study took into account that people may be retiring because cognitive function wasn't working. They eliminated those individuals. So it was a very well done study in this regard.
I want to pick up on what you said about retirement because there is a wonderful website to go to called www.encore.org, which deals with encore careers for people who want to do something different after they're finished with their main job, their lifetime's work, but they don't want to be called retired. They want to be engaged in some way. So this is a key point. This is a growing area.
I love it. And I mean, look at public policy. I mean, this is a major public policy issue.
Indeed it is.
We're now living until our 80s and 90s, yet we're telling people at age 65.
Right. Question at
Yes.
the microphone.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Williford. My question is, does your book go into any issues of mental health? I'm concerned in particular about the medical effects of workplace abuse, which statistics show are epidemic. 1 out of 3 employees are subjected to workplace abuse. And the statistics also show that the most likely effects of this workplace abuse is clinical depression, anxiety, and even PTSD. And it seems that most employers are not even aware of this, but it's a very common managerial attitude among a lot of employers that having this very heavy-handed, tough, treating your employees as machines approach is the best way to go, and that it's most productive, which the statistics also show is a falsity.
No, the book is much more about the rules for one's health. I mean, you hit a very important issue. I'm not denying that at all. but that really is the subject, it should be the subject of a whole nother book because it is a major issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
David, fabulous talk.
Thank you.
What are you wearing on your wrist? What's it called?
So this is called a Nike Fuel Band. And what it does is
band?
F-U-E-L, fuel. Nike developed an algorithm that looks at movement over time, and it treats things differently. Walking gives a certain fuel points when you do it fast, running, or activities. And I get a score where this is hours 1. How many hours I hit my goal today, and then what is my fuel points for the day. And so I know I need to hit 2,500 fuel units to be healthy. And so I figure out how to do that during the day, and it motivates me. You know, it's a tool that I can look and say, hey, I haven't done enough, and I do more. We're a very quantitative society, and this is one of the few things we actually have a metric we can do something about.
Where do you get it?
Well, there are a half a dozen companies that make these. Fitbit, Nike's another. The Nike store sells this. You can go online, Amazon, get Fitbit. Any store around here sell them. They're very common, these little devices now.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
I want to go back to fish oils.
Fish oils.
What do you do with a whole generation who is giving fish cod liver oil as children?
So the question is cod liver oil. Cod liver oil is this remarkable thing because remember what
What does it take to get rid of that out of your system?
what does the liver do? Well, the liver detoxifies things. So in fact, fish, you know, especially cod, which are deep fish and eat a lot of bad things occasionally, if you look in the cod liver, that's where you find it concentrated the most. So in fact, if we went back and look at cod liver oil, that's where most of the mercury is, and that's where most of the contaminants are. I think there was a notion in the old days that if something tasted really bad, it must be good for you. So I wouldn't do it anymore. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lydia, and my husband always complained that I take vitamin pills. But what about folic acid during pregnancy?
So that's a great. So yes, there are exceptions to the vitamin rule. Is that during pregnancy, prenatal vitamins work. There are certain vitamins that work for certain eye conditions. I'm glad you mentioned it. But I'm talking about. Well, it's not that pregnancy is not normal, but an individual without an existing condition, whether it be pregnancy or the eye condition, the vitamins haven't shown a benefit. Yeah.
Hi, it was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And I'm bound to live to 100
All
after
right.
this meeting. But you know, I'm 71. I'm a nurse. I've lived, and we all, you don't have to be a nurse to do this. We have all lived through bad information. It's always the studies. There are fad things that you do. I mean, the whole estrogen thing. I mean, so I just feel like that it's just very hard to have much faith, even though people say things are based on studies. The studies, I mean, I remember as an OBGYN nurse, the studies about estrogen that came out, which had everybody taking estrogen replacement, and then all of a sudden, the studies are all saying something else. So it's hard to
You make
get
such a
on
great point,
any
which is why
bandwagon.
this is why I wrote the book. Is that, you know, what we're trying to rely on is long-term studies that look at long-term outcome, like how you live. But you're right, I'm the same profession that in the 1970s says, eat margarine, not butter. And if you look at the epidemiologic data, we killed millions of people by doing that. So we are very good at these declarative statements with no data behind them. So one of the tenets in the book is, you know, when you go through those airport back scanners, I wouldn't do it. Why? Because we have no long-term outcome data with those new scanners. So when I go to the airport, I get a free massage every time I go. And then I go to the gate. But I'm not going to do something without long-term data behind it. Remember, we also, in the 1950s, we put our feet into these x-ray boxes. What do you know? It caused cancer on the skin. And so without real data behind things, we shouldn't do it. And so what we really believe in our first book and this book is that you have to look at where it was published, what the outcome was of the study. You know, one of the first big data studies came out last month, and it was amazing. There are 320 million prescriptions a year for testosterone. So what they did was they pulled the VA, the Veterans Administration data set, and they looked at people with what we call low T, that's advertised on TV all the time, and the people who got testosterone and those who didn't. 25% higher death rate and significantly higher heart attack rate when you got testosterone. Nobody had done... There's another drug. You know, there's this, I don't know what he said. There's a study. Oh, what a way to go. By the way, in a randomized study of testosterone versus Viagra for sexual function, Viagra was far superior. Growth hormone. If I gave a 70-year-old growth hormone, the next month their friends are going to come up to me, you look fantastic, you lost weight, you look like $1 million. And they would be right. On average, though, they're going to live 12 years shorter, but they're going to look better. And so, again, it goes to your value system. Do you want to play with your grandkids, or do you want to look good today? You know, it's the right answer for you as an individual. But the key is have the information to make that decision. Yes?
I really love what you're up to. I just want to give 2 examples of something. I appreciate people like you, the Environmental Working Group, the Center for Science and the Public Interest, and I really try to pay a lot of attention to health things, and I'm constantly astonished by things that people don't know. And just 2 little examples, and then I'll get to my question point. And there's a certain mutual relative of the folks here and yours that is not here, but well, it's irresistible to not say that I suggested to him, and I just found out you said this. He and I have long phone conversations, and about 6 months ago, not knowing what you've said, I suggested that he walk and talk. And so now you've spoken about it because of that sitting. I also mentioned to him something I learned, that turmeric is the only thing I've ever heard of that acts on amyloid plaques in terms of dementia, and that there's no wrong.
Doesn't,
because
in randomized trials it didn't work. In randomized trials it didn't work.
Okay, I'm off that one. And the other one, he actually believed me on that one. And okay, the other one is that the gas in even seltzer, but these diet sodas and everything, pulls calcium out of your bones. And people are taking their vitamin D and their calcium with their diet sodas.
Well, again, don't take calcium and vitamin D. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
But no, the gas, carbonated gas, doesn't pull calcium out of bone.
I heard years ago it did from a rheumatologist.
No, years ago it did, but it's changed. There's in soda, there's phosphate in soda,
Yeah.
but that's Coca-Cola. So it's not the gas part. It's in the Coke part. But don't drink any don't drink any sodas is the message.
Okay. So anyway, at the Green Festival, I spent a huge amount of time with folks. It was a Maryland group against smart meters and all the carrying. Okay. The carrying of phones in pockets, the phones against the ears.
All right, so cell phones. It's a great question.
Laptops.
So I went before Congress about cell phones,
Cancer.
and they were looking at actually lowering the bandwidth of the antennas in the country, which means that our cell phones would work for about a square block in every city. And so I said, listen, cell phones causing brain cancer. It came from a study which was 6,000 people with brain cancer. When they asked them and their spouse, how much cell phone did you use? Well, the one with cancer used it 3 times more, and that's where this data comes from. That's where the World Health Organization made a proclamation. Well, a group actually went out and audited their cell phone bills, and they were exactly the same, because human nature is to blame something. I have brain cancer. It must be because of the cell phone use. So we actually said, listen, if cell phones cause brain cancer, from 1970 till today, let's look at the incidence of brain cancer. It had to have changed, right? In 1970, if you had a cell phone, it was the size of this. And so the incidence of brain cancer from 1970, and by the way, they had never looked at that data. The incidence of cell phone of brain cancer from 1970 to today hasn't changed at all. So I can't tell you that cell phones don't cause brain cancer, but there is zero data, that they do. Yes.
Coffee and tea have been controversial for a long time. Is there what's your
So you mean if there were a competition between coffee and tea, who would win? So the data are the following: is up to 3 cups of coffee or tea a day may have a health benefit in some individuals. Anything more than 3 cups has a significant detriment, starts to fall off significantly. The other interesting point is those energy drinks, the 5-hour energy drinks or whatever it is, those are about the worst thing you can do. When you drink a cup of coffee, it's over 20, 30 minutes. So it's caffeine over time. When you do a shot of something all at once, there have been close to 10,000 emergency room visits just this year or last year because of this caffeine from these energy drinks. So stay away from the energy drinks. Coffee is a remarkable thing in tea. Have it in moderation. Try to have the same amount every day. You know what it's like when you do 2 days on, 1 day off? Not good. and try to do it at the same time every day, and stop at about 6 to 7 hours before you go to bed.
Gentleman at the microphone, and then the lady over here. These will be our last questions.
Good evening. So I think I just had a quick question for you, David. If you had a magic wand and could help educate everybody else here a little bit, what would you think healthcare would look like, and what would you wish for in the next 5 years or so?
So Jerry, who asked the question, is one of the leaders of the National Cancer Institute. So what I say here, he will implement tomorrow because he has a big checkbook.
You're going to do it in one paragraph.
I just want people to take responsibility for their own health care. I think we're going to change healthcare from the ground up, not the top down. I really believe that each of us have to go in with the information on ourselves. So it means you got to store your information in the cloud. You got to know your information and go in and discuss it with your doctor. Go in and say, why aren't I on an aspirin? Is a statin right for me? Here's the data. I want you to go back and forth with your doctor. That's how we're going to change healthcare dramatically going forward. The other thing I want to do is I want to figure out a way where we can learn from every experience. When you search on Google, it's better today than it was yesterday. They looked at where you went and actually made it better. When I see patients, it's the same as it was a decade ago. Part of it is we have no common language for what we do. You call it a broken leg, you call it a fractured leg. And we don't have the ability to learn from the data. That needs to be created. We have to establish national standards for data so we can learn. Yes?
I have one simple question and then a comment.
Sure.
I'm a pediatrician, and the AAP recommends that we supplement all exclusively breastfed babies with vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about
There's no
that?
data. I mean, I'm not against it, but we have no data. There was no randomized study done to show a benefit in that setting. So looking at just vitamin D levels is somewhat meaningless. It's what we call out of context. And so what happens is when you give a big bolus of something like vitamin D, you downregulate the receptor and you screw up signaling, which is why in the high doses there's that weird bone and increased fractures in the women. So I don't know, and I'm really, ashamed that our profession keeps saying these things to do. It may be right, but it may be wrong. We need to do the studies.
Yeah, and I mean, that's scary
I agree.
for me because I'm supposedly advising people. And on that same note, I would say that the recommendation for people to come to their physicians armed with information and so forth, we need to first arm the medical education so that the other person will have something to add to that.
Right, but there's nothing like a physician whose face, a deer in the headlights when the patient says, here's the study that shows someone like me should be on X, and they look at it like this. And again, if your physician won't talk to you or won't discuss it, go to a different one. But we need to push for change. Changing education, I agree, needs to be done, but that's going to be a lot harder than I think educating individuals.
As an organizer, your music to my ears. Suggestion for your next book, your 50 most salient facts. And that'll wake us up.